is John Britto. I'm an associate professor of chemistry at Delaware County Community College. I appreciate this opportunity to share with you some of my personal history, the careers that I have had over the course of my life, some of the experiences I have had during those careers, and also share with you some of the learnings that I have gained as a result of those careers and as a result of my upbringing. My parents were immigrants from Portugal. I am a first-generation American. My father came to the United States in the mid-1920s. He established a home and he established a job here in Pennsylvania, in fact, up in Palmerton, Pennsylvania. And then he went back to Portugal to get my mother, and they were married before they came back to the United States. And she was a mere 20 years old when they left Portugal. That was the last time that she saw her parents. They took a long boat ride, and you'll notice on the left-hand side, in the upper left-hand corner of this slide, there is a passenger manifest which lists both of their names and the date that they arrived in New York. To the right of that, you see a representation, you see a plaque which represents their registration as immigrants at the Ellis Island Memorial. Ellis Island was the main point on the East Coast where immigrants came from all countries in Europe to immigrate to the United States. My father purchased a small home, and you'll notice below in the bottom center of the screen a representation of what that home looked like. It was all the homes on the street that I grew up on were all very close together. They were all one story, and again, very little space in between. And that picture gives you an idea of what the homes looked like. I have 3 older sisters, and my youngest sister is several years older than I am. My parents were not expecting another child when I came along, and they certainly weren't expecting a son because I had 3 sisters. I was born in Palmerton, Pennsylvania, in the Palmerton Hospital, and I grew up, as I said, in a small home on a street where the houses were very close together. Our family life was very simple. My mother was a great cook, and she taught me some things about cooking. Unfortunately, when she died, she took all her recipes with her because her version of a recipe was, how much do I put in? A little bit. And how much is a little bit? Whatever she decided it was that particular day. But I had some great meals, and I had a very nice family life with my parents and my youngest sister. By the time I came along, my 2 other sisters were pretty much gone out of the home since they had gone off to college and started their own families. One thing that is fairly noteworthy of my family life is freshness was key in that particular time period when I was born. And we would have a farmer that would come down our street, and my mother would purchase eggs directly from the farmer and live chickens directly from the farmer. And then she would take that live chicken and go down into an open area underneath our house, and in that area she would kill the chicken, pluck the feathers, and prepare it to have for dinner. And that was the freshest chicken I have ever had in my life, and it was prepared very well. So again, our family life was pretty simple. Notice that there's a couple things on this slide that show some, maybe we consider them artifacts at this stage of my time period of growing up. In the top corner of the picture, you see a representation of the type of car that I first remember. It was an automatic, had an automatic transmission, but that style is very similar of the time period where I grew up. Below that to the left, you see a black and white yes, black and white television, which had a big picture tube that stuck out of the back, so it took up a lot of extra room in the area where it was placed. And then to the right of that, you see a rotary dial phone. And a rotary dial phone was typical of the time period when I was a small child. And the other notable thing about this rotary dial phone, it was hooked up to a party line. A party line was one that was shared by several homes, and they all participated on that same one telephone line. So needless to say, there were multiple times where we had to wait in order to call friends or family, and likewise we had to maybe cut our conversations a little bit short. So those are just some things that were available to me when I was a child. My parents taught me Christian values when I was small and when I was growing up, and those values have stuck with me throughout the years. Values such as humility, patience, kindness, treating other people with respect, having an attitude of service to serve others. And I'm very appreciative for that upbringing because that has influenced my life quite a bit as I have grown up and accepted jobs and so on. I had lots of friends, and my friends and I would go on hikes, we'd ride our bikes, we would go in the back of some other folks' houses where there were big empty fields to play baseball and stuff. And we would also at times play football in the street in front of my house. And we would continue that game until a car came, and then we would spread out, go to the curb, and then come back on when the car passed by. So again, that was kind of the norm for that period of time. One funny story that I tell my grandkids, my mother didn't see me much during the day because I was always outside playing. And everybody knew it was time to come home, or it was time for them to go home, to go to their homes, when my mother would be yelling my name and wondering where I was. And they also knew that if I didn't listen, that she would soon come around with a yardstick to help coax me back to my house. Both of my parents worked outside of the home. My father worked at the New Jersey Zinc Company, and that was the main source of employment for individuals in Palmerton at that time. You notice up in the upper left-hand corner that there is a depiction of one of the plants for New Jersey Zinc Company. There was a plant similar to this on the eastern side of town, and there was one on the western side of town. My father walked daily to the plant on the eastern side of town. That was the one that we lived closer to, and he would work various shifts as a laborer in the zinc plant. My mother also worked outside the home, and her activities were more of a domestic nature. She would clean houses for people that she had become acquainted with over a period of time, and she would also wash towels that were used by the local dentist that we went to. At that time, the dentist did not use the paper towels that we use now. They used actually cloth towels, and those had to be washed on a regular basis. My mother would wash those and was reimbursed for that work. I was taught the value of work at a very young age. I helped my mother clean houses. I helped her take care of the dish towels or I should say the towels that the dentist had that needed to be cleaned. I also helped neighbors in terms of cleaning things, cleaning up outside their home, shoveling snow. We didn't have any grass, so luckily for me, I didn't have grass to cut. But there were lots of other things to do to help our neighbors and who didn't have any children that could help them out. My social life was also not that exciting. I had friends, and we did, as I said, we spent a lot of time together. I had several girlfriends during my school life. One of them became my wife. She was my high school sweetheart. My school life was revolved around an elementary school, which was close by my house, a middle school, which was about a 1.5 mile walk. And yes, I walked both ways, back and forth to middle school every day. And then I went to high school, and you'll see a picture of the high school in the upper center of this slide. That high school opened when I was a freshman in high school, and we were the first class that got to attend there. Now, the interesting thing about this school is that it was located at the top of a hill in town. And I lived probably about 2.5 miles from this school, much further downhill from where this particular, where the high school was. And I walked to the school both in the morning to go to school and in the evening to go home. We didn't have any buses. And to this day, I can sometimes convince my grandchildren that I walked uphill both ways in the snow with snowshoes when I was going to high school. They're getting a little wise to that whole story, but nevertheless, I continue to tell it. And then when I graduated from high school, or I should say prior to graduating from high school, my parents were encouraging me to go to college. My two sisters had gone to college. One had gone to nursing school. And they saved money for each one of us. So our life, as I said, was simple. We didn't do a lot of vacationing. We didn't have a lot of extra stuff. We had what we needed. And each of the children had money put away so that we could have an education, because my parents definitely felt that they wanted things better for us than they had when they not only were children, but also when they immigrated to the United States. The plan was for me to go to a state teachers college. And at that time, the colleges that we look at now as Kutztown, Mansfield, a couple other colleges that are in that state college system were all known as state teachers colleges. And students went there to learn how to become educators. My parents were quite shocked when I said, I would like to go and study engineering. That was not their plan for me at that particular time. And so we had some discussion about that, and they eventually supported me and said, you study what you want to study. They were more concerned, I think, about the cost and how that could be afforded, but we'll get to that discussion shortly. So they supported me, and in the bottom portion of this slide, you see a picture of Lehigh University. I applied and was accepted to Lehigh University, and I started there as a freshman studying engineering. I firmly believe that each of us comes to Earth with a plan that has been prepared for us. And part of our mission on Earth is to uncover the details of that plan and execute that plan to the best of our ability. Part of my plan, I determined, was to go to Lehigh University and study engineering. Part of the plan that I didn't realize until I got to Lehigh was that I was supposed to be part of the military. And I had never thought of that prior to enrolling and starting classes at Lehigh. When I got there, I joined Air Force ROTC, and that turned out to be a very good decision. As a freshman and sophomore, I was in the ROTC program, and I was fortunate enough to be awarded a scholarship as a junior. And that paid for the rest of my education, easing the burden of what my parents were worried about in terms of finances. During my junior and senior year, my high school sweetheart and I were married, and I finished my senior year, and at the time when I was preparing to finish my senior year, we were expecting our first daughter. Our first daughter was born about a month after I graduated. Upon graduation, I was commissioned a second lieutenant. And now I had graduated, and my commitment was that I needed to serve 6 years of active duty as an aviator with the Air Force because they paid for my education. So I graduated, and the next thing that came along is it's time for you to serve. We packed up our things, my wife, myself, my wife, and our little girl, and we headed out to California for flight training. Well, that in itself was an adventure. The drive itself was an adventure, and then getting to a place and being on our own. Neither of us had been away from family further than just a couple of towns away, but here now we're way across the country, kind of on our own. Well, we acclimated pretty quickly, made a lot of friends, and it turned out to be a very good experience for us. After graduation, I was assigned to McGuire Air Force Base, and the aircraft that I was going to fly was the C-141. And you see two pictures that are representative or related to McGuire. The one in the top left-hand corner is a picture of the airplane ramp at McGuire with some other associated buildings to the left of the airplanes. Below that, on an angle, you see a picture of the C-141 Starlifter, which was the primary cargo hauling aircraft at that time when I entered the Air Force. Our mission was primarily international, where we would carry cargo back and forth between Europe, Asia, the Middle East, any place where we had people, troops stationed for various things. We'd carry all kinds of stuff. And this was exciting for me. Little did I know when I was a 5-year-old boy growing up that I would have the opportunity to go so many exciting places. Places such as Cairo, Egypt, and Jerusalem, and Tehran, Iran, and many times in Germany, many times in outside of London, England, times in cities in Asia Pacific. So it was a very interesting time for me. I had many exciting experiences. There is a time that was a very sobering day in my period of time at McGuire. In August of 1976, we were expecting our second child. In fact, she was due to be born in a few days, and my commander made it possible for me to be at home in anticipation of the birth. So my assignment was, while I was not flying around the world at this particular time, was to be the supervisor of flying, which meant that I was the primary contact for our air crews that were out serving and flying missions on that particular day, and also for other crews that were not necessarily part of our group, but still were stationed at McGuire. Well, August 28th was a bad day for the U.S. military, U.S. Air Force Military Airlift Command. 2 accidents of C-141 Starlifters occurred on that same day, and this was the day where I was working as a supervisor of flying, handling the telephones and contact with crews and also with higher headquarters. In one accident, a C-141 Starlifter stalled and crashed after an aborted landing at Sandström Air Force Base, or Air Base, Greenland. And if you look in the bottom center of the slide with the helicopter, that is the scene shortly after the crash of that particular airplane. In that crash, 23 of the 27 crew members and passengers were killed. On that same day, another C-141 broke up in a severe thunderstorm while on descent into Mildenhall Air Base, the United Kingdom, killing all 18 passengers and crew on board the airplane. and that representation, that photograph of the wreckage on the ground is shown on the right, towards the right-hand side of the screen. This was a very sobering day for me and for all of us who were involved with these people, I should say the crew. They were our friends. We flew with them on a regular basis. And I think what was most impactful to me is I had charge of the telephones. And as the news got out about these crashes, family members, friends were calling the squadron to find out about, well, what airplane was this? Was my husband on it? Was somebody else that I know on it? And I had to take those calls. I was given direct orders by higher headquarters that said, do not share any details about these crashes, not anything that happened, and definitely no release of information of who was on board those two aircraft. I happen to know many of the individuals and flew with many of them time and time again. So for me, that alone was something that really hit me hard. And I don't recall this, but my wife shared with me that for a fairly long period of time after that, she could sense that I was now scared of flying. I loved flying, but she could sense now that when this happened, that I definitely had a different attitude. It took me a while to get over it, as she related, and I eventually went back to flying, but certainly an impact on my life at that point of time. Once my 6-year commitment was completed, and I realized how much I enjoyed flying, I decided to continue in the Air Force Reserve. When I separated from active duty, we moved to Richmond, Virginia for my first job in civilian life, so to speak, with a specialty chemical manufacturer. We made products for skincare, hair care, cosmetics, bath soaps, etc., and you see some representative pictures on this slide. While in Richmond, I joined a reserve unit flying the C-5 out of Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, and in the lower left-hand corner you see a representation of the C-5, which at that point in time was the largest airplane in the world, and it carried cargo. We carried cargo just like we did in the C-141, but a much longer range airplane, much bigger, and able to carry lots of larger pieces of equipment. So at that point in time, I worked there for 3 years, flew C-5s on a part-time basis. Reserves don't have a full-time commitment. It's kind of, well, when can I go on a trip over a weekend? And there were certainly opportunities for that. Leave on a Friday night and come back on a Sunday night and gain some additional flying hours. And after that 3-year time period, we moved to Ohio, to Cleveland, Ohio. And that took me too far away from the C-5 unit. And then I went to join a C-130 reserve unit in Youngstown, Ohio. And the C-130 in the upper right-hand corner is a turboprop airplane. The other two that I flew were jets. And so this was a different type of airplane, also had a bit of a different mission. The C-130 was primarily used for airdrop delivery of troops and cargo. And that actually was the last airplane that I flew. We moved to Ohio in the 1983 timeframe, and I remained with the unit in Ohio flying C-130s until I retired from the Air Force in Air Force Reserve in 1996. So all told, it was about 22 years. Well, in fact, it was exactly 22 years of service between active duty and reserve, and it was a wonderful time. I not only worked and grew my civilian career, but also had, again, many opportunities to visit exciting places and fly exciting missions. While in Ohio, while in Ohio, again, my career expanded. I took on additional responsibility. I was in sales and marketing at that point in time. And we eventually moved again to Pennsylvania. And I guess I need to make a small correction because I stayed with a 130, but when we moved to Pennsylvania, I had to join a unit flying the C-130 in Willow Grove, and that's where I finished my Air Force career. So moving around with different companies, different responsibilities, and also having the opportunity to fly several different airplanes. This time in Pennsylvania was a difficult learning time for me. Over the course of my civilian career, I had gotten very focused on my career, and we had by the time we lived in Pennsylvania, we had 8 children, 7 daughters and 1 son. And because I was so focused on my career and wanting to provide the best for them, my priorities got messed up. And instead of focusing more on my family and making sure that they had emotional support for me, I focused more on making sure that the temporal things were taken care of, that they had the nicest clothes, the best food, a good place to live, and so on. And that was a serious mistake on my part. And I would love to have that time back where I could kind of have a do-over and not make that same mistake again. In fact, it resulted in a separation for my wife and I and our children. I accepted a position in Asia Pacific as a business director for our Asia Pacific region in charge of the personal care industry. By that time, when I accepted that, my wife and I had separated, and so I went to Asia and was stationed in Singapore on my own. And this slide shows a couple of different spots that or I should say that I had responsibility for. On the left-hand side is a picture of Singapore, which is a very bustling city. It's on an island, and the very, very high scale environment. I traveled to 11 different countries while I was stationed in Asia Pacific, traveling about 75% of the time when I was over there, to places like Shanghai, China, which you see in the next picture to the right, Tokyo, Japan, which you see in the following picture to the right. And I had quite a bit of responsibility. This was a result of my performance in civilian life, and as I said, it was a great job, but it was at the detriment of how my family life had changed. So what did I learn about all that? I learned that families are more important than jobs, and that priorities should not get in the way. I should say work priorities should not get in the way of how we interact and emotionally support our families. I might also say that I had quite a bit of learning to do when I got to Asia Pacific. My attitude was I was being sent there because in my impression, I was being sent there because I knew everything and I knew how to help these people. So I was a bit arrogant about this assignment. I was going over there to make sure that they did everything the way that we did in the United States. And that was, again, the wrong attitude to approach a new position and new people. That was the wrong way to approach it. So what did I learn? I learned that the people in Asia, regardless of the country I went to, were the absolute best people that I had ever met. They were humble, they were kind, They wanted to do everything they could do to make things comfortable for me, and that taught me a very valuable lesson, that I don't know everything. And just because I think I do doesn't give me permission to kind of infiltrate on their cultures. It taught me a lot of respect for other cultures and how they interact with each other and how they interact with people that are not of their culture. They taught me humility. They taught me to listen. They taught me patience. They taught me how to handle conversations that may be of a more delicate nature within individual cultures, because again, this was 11 countries and all of them had a bit of a different culture. So that was quite eye-opening to me and gave me a very different perspective, and also changed my attitude about a number of things. On the far right side, you see a picture of the Bay Bridge and the Sydney Opera House. After being in Singapore for about 3.5 years on my own, my company moved me to Sydney, and my family, we had kind of reconciled ourselves, and they joined me in Sydney. Not all the children, some of them were on to their own lives or in college, but there were 4 that joined me in Sydney, my wife and 4 children. And that was a great experience as well. Just like the other Asia Pacific countries, again, Australia is kind of a country and a separate culture all on its own. The people in Australia were so kind, so pleasant, so helpful, so welcoming, that again, they taught me a lot about how to interact with others. We had a great time. Food was great. Traveling around the country, Australia was great. In fact, we even climbed the Bay Bridge, I should say. I did, and a few of my children did. This was a very controlled situation. The tour guides had us hooked up in harnesses and all linked together, and they allowed us to walk up the 2 sides, approaching the center of the bridge, essentially climbing. Again, very controlled environment, but they certainly didn't want to lose anybody down to the traffic below. But it was fun, just doing that climb under those controlled circumstances. So that is experience outside of the country that I had in that assignment. The time finally came where corporate headquarters said, you've had enough fun internationally, it's time to come back and tell us everything you learned in Asia Pacific and take on a new responsibility in the corporate offices. So I was moved back to corporate headquarters, and the corporate headquarters were located in New Jersey, and you see the blue arrow kind of pointing in the general area of where that was. And these new responsibilities were significantly more than what I had in Asia Pacific, where I had responsibility for 11 countries. Now I had responsibility for our business in Asia, our business in Europe, and our business in the United States, and Latin America as well. And this was primarily in one particular segment of our business. We sold, as I said, we sold products for raw materials for hair care products, hairspray, hair conditioner, hair gel, those types of things. And that was my responsibility from a marketing and sales standpoint. I interacted quite a bit with research and development to help design products that would meet market needs in the various regions where we were selling our products. I also had a lot of interaction with salespeople in those regions and visited customers on a very regular basis. On one particular instance, I was going to visit a customer in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And this happened to be on September 11th, 2001. And I think many of us are aware of what happened on September 11th in 2001. And this, again, was a circumstance that really hit me hard, so to speak, I guess is the best way to put it. I had left Allentown, Pennsylvania on a flight to Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. to change planes to go to Fort Lauderdale. Well, I'd arrived in Dulles and changed planes, got on the connecting flight, and we were pulling away from the gate at Dulles, and the captain came on the intercom and said, "We're on ground stop for a while." We didn't know why. He didn't tell us at that moment, but we just stopped right in the taxiway. And then he came back on a few minutes later and said, "We are on ground stop. All air traffic has been shut down in the United States because a plane has hit the World Trade Center." And we all looked at each other and said, well, okay, well, that can't be too bad. Maybe some small plane just kind of ran into the roof. And so we were a bit calm for a few minutes, and then we all started getting on our phones and started to see pictures of what had happened while we were thinking that it was just something minor. You see on this particular slide a picture of one of the towers aflame and on fire, and you see in the lower right-hand corner an airplane heading directly for one of the twin towers. If you recall, in that day, both twin towers were destroyed by aircraft hitting them. Another aircraft hit the Pentagon, and another one crashed in western Pennsylvania. Now, why am I telling you all this? I happened to be at Dulles, and we were on the taxiway very close to taking off when we were told that all activity, all air traffic had now been suspended indefinitely. And we went back to the gate. And as we got back to the gate, we got off of the airplane. And as we entered the terminal, it was absolute chaos. People were running everywhere. People were crying. It was just, there were people everywhere, just so chaotic, massive confusion. And in the meantime, while all this, before we got off the plane, some folks had managed to get some photographs from, I guess, family members perhaps, that showed some of the destruction that you're witnessing on this particular slide. So again, the terminal was chaotic. Now I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to get home? Because I wasn't going anywhere that particular day, except home, hopefully. Well, because of the catastrophic nature of this event and what had happened, buses that were leaving the airport were completely full by the time I got down to the bus loading area. All the rental cars were booked, none were available. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get home? Because I was really scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know exactly what was going on other than this catastrophic event, and I was scared. I managed to find a taxi cab with the driver that I asked if he would take me to Harrisburg, because I had talked to my wife and asked if she could come to Harrisburg Airport and pick me up and, drive me home. If I could get there, then that would put me what I felt it was in a safer position. So I made acquaintance with another gentleman who was kind of in the same boat I was. He was trying to get back to Newark because that's where his car was. Also the source of a couple of these planes that were involved in these collisions. So we got into the taxi cab, and the driver agreed to take us to Harrisburg for a certain price, and there we went. We got to Harrisburg. My wife picked us up and took us to our home. At that time, we lived in Allentown. And we spent the rest of the day kind of renewing these keeping up with the news, kind of figuring out, well, why did all this happen? What's going on? And again, just a very scary situation. The gentleman that was with me needed to get back to Newark. So I took him in my car, I drove him back to Newark, and I would say that if we saw 10 cars on that 1.5 hour drive to Newark from Allentown, I would be very surprised. Everybody was kind of locked up in their home because they didn't know what was going on and could this get any worse than what it already was. We got to Newark, everything was dark, there was no traffic, no cars anywhere. There were police everywhere, and they wanted to know what we were doing, and I explained, and they let us proceed, and he got to his car and went home to his family. The remarkable thing that also struck me was that from the Newark airport, you can see the Manhattan skyline, and normally that skyline is lit up with lights from buildings. It was completely dark. And that was a very eerie feeling, knowing that this catastrophic event had impacted things so badly, notwithstanding the loss of life that occurred on that day. After another few years, I had a major career change in my civilian life. I was advised that my services were no longer required, and I lost my position at the company I had worked for about 20 years. So I had now reached the end of my corporate career, essentially. And I was trying to figure out, well, now what do I do? What other skills do I have that I might be able to call upon in order to continue to support my family? What else can I offer? So I looked and thought and kind of came up with the idea, I think part of the plan way back when I was growing up was that I would be a teacher. That was what my parents wanted me to do. So maybe that's what needs to be part of the plan now. So I spent some time looking at opportunities and got engaged with a couple of different things. I tutored the medical college admission test for Kaplan for a number of years. I had to prepare for that. I was trained in all the particular sciences, the physics, biology, biochem, organic chem, and so on, all stuff that I hadn't used in years. In addition, I had to be able to instruct candidates in verbal skills and essentially educate them on how to best approach this very difficult exam. So I did that for a couple of years, and at the same time, I began to work as an independent tutor for a company called Wyzant. Wyzant has a platform where individuals can sign up to be independent contractors as tutors in whatever subjects they are comfortable with. Wyzant has the platform. They set you up with students so that the student and the tutor is matched together, and then from that point on, the tutor takes over and sets the times and all that stuff. And I also began teaching as an adjunct. I taught at several different spots as an adjunct in chemistry at Lehigh Carbon Community College in the Lehigh Valley, at Widener University, at Delaware County Community College, and all of those were very terrific experiences. I started at Delaware County Community College in 2013, and over the course of time, that turned out to be a very good decision, because after 5 or 6 years, I was offered and accepted a position as a full-time faculty member in chemistry at Delaware County Community College, and that's what I have been doing since. So education was always part of the plan. It just took me a while to get there and to execute that portion of the plan. And I absolutely love teaching. I love interacting with students. I love telling dumb jokes in class, and I just like seeing students have that aha moment, or the light bulb goes off when they understand a concept that perhaps was unfamiliar to them prior to that particular discussion. So I am very grateful that I have discovered education as part of my overall plan and have now been able to take part in that portion of my plan. So now we might ask, has everything worked out? And I can say for absolute certain that everything has worked out just fine. I am very comfortable with the way my life has unfolded, the opportunities that I've had, the careers that I have had. It's been very, very enlightening to me. Also, many, many learning experiences. So on this slide, you see a couple of things that I like to do outside of my teaching responsibilities. In the upper center of the screen, you see me dressed up in a striped white and black shirt. I referee high school soccer, and I love doing that. Gives me exercise and, again, helps me interact with youth. So I enjoy that very much. That picture was taken last year at the high school state finals, where the top two ranked teams in districts and in certain categories meet for the state championship. So I had the privilege of being one of the 3 referees in that particular game. To the right of that, you see a book that is entitled Dad Jokes. And my students, I think, have in my classes over the course of time have figured out that I have some pretty dumb jokes. And my kids love dad jokes. We have a family group chat via text that every morning they expect to see a dad joke from me. So I have a couple of books that have dad jokes in them, and everybody gets that and then comments on it and says, "Oh, Dad, where'd you come up with that one?" But it's a fun time, and it gives us an opportunity to share a few minutes together via text. In the bottom right-hand corner, if you have seen me on campus, you know that I am constantly wearing an Ohio State ball cap. I am an incredibly crazy Ohio State Buckeyes football fan. I don't care for any of the other sports, doesn't matter, but football, yes, very, very much a crazy person about Ohio State football. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to attend the Ohio State-Michigan game, and as you probably know, that's one of the biggest rivalries in the country. One of my daughters, my son, and I attended or went to the game, and it was in Ann Arbor. So we were there as Ohio State fans in the midst of all the Michigan fans, and it was an incredible experience. I really enjoyed that. That was, in fact, my birthday present that year from my family. In the middle of the slide, you see tomatoes and jalapeno peppers. I love to garden. I don't like to cut grass, but if I can garden, I'm pretty happy. So that's a sample of what I have had in my garden. That's from last summer. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, you see a large pot, and that large pot is on a gas burner. In that pot is a concoction that I call Low Country Boil, which is a combination of spices, shrimp, corn, potatoes, anything else we can figure out that may be onions that may liven up the mixture. So that is cooked, and different items are put in at different times, so they kind of all end up getting cooked completely at the same time. When it's done, we take that pot, drain the water, and then take the contents and a long picnic table. On that long picnic table is a sheet of paper, The contents of the pot is dumped on the sheet of paper. We have sauces sitting around at various points on that table, and we all just stand around there and eat right from the paper. It is incredibly delicious if you haven't had that opportunity. So that goes to the other thing I love to do, and that's cook. I learned from my mom. She didn't leave me many recipes, but I'm pretty resourceful, and I find stuff on the internet, and I get brave, and I try this and I try that. And most of the time, my family is the unknowing victims of my cooking skills. It's fun, and I love to do it. So I appreciate spending this time and telling you about my life and my career and my missteps and my good fortunes. And I guess I would just like to sum up by saying the most important thing I have learned over the course of my life is when we have values and when we have principles, if we know what those values are and we know what those principles are, adhering to them throughout our life are crucial to having a successful life. And knowing what those values are for each individual is important, and being true and faithful to those particular values and principles, it will bring you happiness. And I know that for certain. And I know that when I wasn't so good at being faithful to those values and principles, that it was not a very good time in my life. And I hope that you've enjoyed what I've shared with you. And if any of you would like to speak with me privately about anything you've heard, I'm on campus most every day at the Marple campus. Thank you, and have a good day.